I speak to this obviously as a recent former CTO, but also from the perspective of an educator, a lifelong public school educator. So obviously what happened to us not too long ago was we had a big significant sea change. We were pretty used to, I guess what I might say, the first generation of shift with the internet and some of the aspects of AI that were just really young at that point in time, maybe 10 years ago. And we're pretty used to Google searches leading to hyperlinks, and even, became talented at searching through and past all of the different sponsored ads and things like that that helps Google to be able to fund this type of search. But what happened at the end of November, most of us kind of saw it at the end of semester, let's say, as perhaps we're getting out of finals, and we realized that, oh my gosh, there's something out there. Students may have cheated. They may have had some of their essays written by this new tool. It actually creates plausible answers, not just a search result. And so this is what I would call the second wave of AI. We're all pretty familiar with what I might call the first wave, where Google starts to fill out information as we're writing an email or doing a search, knowing that the first three words probably lead to the fourth or the fifth word. That was sort of a guessing type of a game that the AI was playing at the time. But we're in a different place right now. At CoSN in 2020, we wrote an artificial intelligence brief. It happened to come out in March, so no one really paid attention because something else really important was happening at the time. And so we just recently have rewritten that in 2023. And we defined at the time artificial intelligence as something that performed human intelligence tasks leveraging complex data sets. We're learning a lot more about how that works, large language models and things like that, but we see a lot of opportunity. So I want to talk today a little bit about what opportunities look like, what AI is and what it isn't. Really, I think it's a new place to start for everything, to put it in a nutshell. But let's go back to ChatGPT, because that was the thing that really blew the whistle, if you will, on what generative AI is. Many districts immediately blocked it. You've probably followed the news. Back then, New York City schools and several others blocked it immediately. It just so happened that New York City is a large district, and they got into the news pretty quickly about that. If you've been watching the news recently, they announced their program to dig into this more deeply, unblocking it in some ways. But there's a good reason to consider blocking it. When it first came out, terms of use said you needed to be 18. Then they changed it to be something more like what we're familiar with, a lot of digital resources online. It was at least 13. And if you're under 18, you have to have parent or guardian legal permission. We're pretty familiar with that type of a way of putting terms of use. But privacy policy still indicates that they are collecting information. But that's just ChatGPT specifically. The conversation we're having is a bit bigger than that. It really is about what GPT is, but also its cousins, I guess you might say. So what's the GPT stand for? It stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer, which basically is a type of neural network that's been around in some simplistic form since the 70s. So it's not brand new. As a matter of fact, it's been used in industry for a decade or so. This particular product, GPT, is relatively new, but still a couple of years old. Generative AI has been around for a while, which is the idea that something can be generated that's novel, I guess we'll say, from a large language model. So it's a large language model. Large language models are models that are and algorithms that are trained on a really large set of data, let's say the entire internet. And when we're talking about training it, we're talking about kind of letting it know the information that that data set knows, like, so let's say the internet, or let's say a medical database or a financial database. This can then provide some degree of prediction as to what you're wanting as you put in natural language. So this is all based on text. So natural language, you enter your prompt by text, so you're typing it in, and then it gives you a result, an answer, if you will. And that's also in text. Of course, we know that generative AI comes in other forms. It can give you an answer in a picture. If it's an image generator, it can even give you an answer in a movie if it's a video generator. But these are all very similar in that they are based on a neural network, pulling information from large data sets, answering the questions that are being asked. So one of the things we learn as educators is it's really important to be able to ask good questions. Well, doesn't that sound familiar? As a biology teacher, I can appreciate that. So let's change some terms around a little bit. ChatGPT is what we've kind of been talking a lot about. That's the water cooler conversation. So it's generative AI, and there's a lot of other products out there today. I'll share some with you towards the end. There are over 250 companies developing different tools. There's a link later to go get these links after this, I believe. But a lot of people are working on this. A lot of money is being put into this. This is, like I said, a sea change that is going to be specific to K-12. And there are many products that are being developed today and are starting to come out today. I'll show a couple of examples here in a second. So when we're talking about this, rather than talking about just ChatGPT, I think it's wise to talk about it as generative AI or GAI, as some would call it. So when we think about that, what can't it do? Well, because it's basically, let's call it a computer brain, a neural network, and it's basically trained on certain pieces of data, that defines its limitations. So it often can't understand context. Matter of fact, if you look at ChatGPT's terms of use and all that information, it will say, a lot of times we don't know what you're asking, so we'll take our best guess, right? So it doesn't understand context. You have to provide that for it. If you don't, you're going to get some weird answer. And it also has a tendency to sometimes give weird answers, which is kind of like a delusional hallucination. They call them hallucinations. So these wrong answers sometimes are spurred by bad questions, but sometimes they're just the system itself confuses itself on the data sets that it's reviewing, and it will make things up. You may have seen just recently, like 2 days ago, I think a lawyer got in trouble because he was using it to cite legal sources that ChatGPT was making up. And so he got in a bit of trouble for that and in regard to his brief. So think about what it can't do well. It doesn't replace human creativity very well because it's just generating things that it's been programmed on. Doesn't have a lot of novel ideas. Creativity, we've always talked about, that's an important thing to teach. It's something America is known for. It doesn't recognize abstract concepts. If you're talking something humorous, something ironic, it might not keep up with you. So let's think about then what that means to us as educators, as K-12 leaders. Well, I think there's a lot of opportunities coming. That's definitely what it is. It's definitely an opportunity. It's going to be a disruptor. Already has happened, I think, in many cases. If I was, in this last month, teaching my biology class, I'd probably have asked some different types of questions on anything that was open book. I might have asked it backwards, if you will. So maybe using a tool like this for AP Bio, which of course those are seniors, juniors typically, they should be able to access this. And you might ask it to ask the chatbot and then prove if the chatbot is right or wrong, because we know sometimes they're wrong, right? So that might be a different way to do these types of assumptions, those types of assignments. So the best way to think of it, though, it will be a disruptor, but I would also think of it as an augmenter, an assistant, an aid for whoever is using it. And I would hope that that would be us. So there are concerns, there are reasons that we might want to ban this if we don't understand what it's doing from a perspective of student data privacy. We need to understand that before we say yes. This is no different than any other online tool. I know one of the things that frustrates chief technology officers is when things get adopted without us being able to check it out, especially when it comes to fitting into our ecosystem, which this isn't that much of a problem with, but also in terms of student data privacy. Agreements ideally should be in place. You're probably not going to get that with Microsoft or Google, but as you work with other companies. So when we talk about banning, though, we're only talking about not letting it work on our network, not letting it work on our devices. So as you think that through, that's a bit of a problem. If you ban it, you're only banning those students who depend only on your network. You're not banning it from students who can get to it at home, in the coffee shop around the corner from where they happen to live. And you start seeing a bit of a problem in terms of digital equity and access. And this is a problem that we can create if we just ban everything. Because again, what we're doing is we're keeping it off our network, keeping it off our devices. And for students, like many of mine, in the past, they're just not going to be able to get that resource. Others will. And so that's a concern and a consideration that we have to have. It's not something we can just blanket say, well, we're just not going to use it, because I guarantee you, your students, your parents, they will use it if they have access. So we have to consider access. I'll tell you, ChatGPT and other products are mostly built for commercial space. They're not built for K-12, but the huge conversation that's happened over the last 5 to 6 months definitely has many dev teams thinking about K-12 as they're developing products. And many have already come out with products. Here's a good way to think about generative AI. This is from someone at Stanford that I heard say this. I thought it was brilliant. It's going to replace some jobs, but for the most part, it's definitely going to replace the jobs of those who never use it. And I guess that includes all of us who are on this call today. So a little bit of a wake-up call. We need to be thinking about how we can use this tool. So it's definitely going to disrupt, but again, it could also be used as a great disruptor. If we think back as educators on the things we've always wanted to do and never had the means to accomplish, generative AI can accomplish some of those things for us in an amazing way. Not in 5 years, but today. Definitely in the next year. So we already need to be thinking about how we can use these tools, and we need to become familiar with these tools. So when we think about that, personalized learning is a huge opportunity that AI can be leveraged to accomplish. Many products are being created right now to help us with this. I knew, this is something critical that we often don't have time for. We can't invest in it like we would like to. There's also amazing tutoring systems where students can be one-on-one. I'll talk about one of these in a second here, where they're getting real-time feedback as they need it. Again, we can't clone ourselves. We can't clone our teachers. But in a way, we can, especially if they have oversight and insight into these tutoring conversations that this AI can have with the students. And then also, I've spent a good chunk of the last part of my career creating data analytics tools with visualizations to let me see, different types of things to help identify students in need of services, or students that are, needing to have additional help, or, just overall progress of a school or a district. There are many of the tools that are going to come out that are going to help us with these things. So
hey, can I just jump in and ask a question or offer that, get your reaction to it? I've said that I believe generative AI has the potential to really meet every student in their proximal zone of development, and then allow for the acceleration of their learning to take place. Because if an individual, a student gets 1 to 11 wrong, why are we asking them to do 13 to 53? Yep. And likewise, if a kid gets 1 to 11 right, why are we asking them to do 11 to 53? And what generative AI has the potential to do if used well, I think, and so I'm asking you as the expert, to really create a personalized instructional program that can meet the student exactly where they're at. And if we can do that, it should accelerate their learning as we move forward, rather than pushing beyond where they're at or teaching them something they already know. Any reaction to that?
Unequivocally, yes. That's exactly what it does. You did a brilliant job explaining that, David. It's exactly what its potential is. Now the question is, who's going to come out with that product? We have something in our mind, right? And who is going to be able to develop that? And then, honestly, what does that cost? Because right now, ChatGPT is free. But did you know that ChatGPT, if you use a search on that costs 23 times more than a Google search. Who's paying for that? Well, probably Microsoft. They gave them $10 billion. And it's in Bing, right? But at some point, that's us. at some point we have to have a line item, or there's going to have to be some kind of a trade-off. One of the observations I made at a recent conference was Microsoft and others were starting to talk a lot about taking all that processing power that's in the cloud and pushing it down to the user. Well, that's fine for me on this desktop setup I have. That doesn't work for Chromebooks. So there's a big implication if that comes to pass, right? So yeah, it's definitely got implications that are huge and awesome. You said that very well in terms of how it could be leveraged, much like people in marketing and advertising and drug development and other areas have utilized it. But someone has to come to market with the product, and then we have to understand, how do we fund that, and then does it run on everything we have? So these are some of the questions that continue to be open.
Thank you. And I'm sorry to interrupt. And for our attendees, if you have additional questions, Diane, I'll get to yours after Pete and Joseph do their presentations. If you have other questions, please put them in the chat and I'll monitor those. So Pete, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, great. Well, so I think that, to your point, David, it's going to provide a lot of opportunity for innovation and education. It's already doing this for businesses. I was listening to a venture capitalist yesterday, and he was talking about all of his future investments are moving towards companies that are leveraging AI. And the reason for that is because these companies are becoming the innovators of today. When you think about the advent of the internet, we didn't have Google, we didn't have even Tesla. These are some of the biggest companies in the world today, Alphabet, and the parent company of Google. They didn't exist. Well, I guarantee you that in 5 to 10 years, we're going to have new companies we've never heard of before that are as big as those. That's the significance of this. It's also changing the nature of work. You're hearing that kind of phrase a lot right now. Obviously, for educators that are on secondary side, at least CTE, this is a huge deal. What does that mean? Changing the nature of work. Well, it just means using AI in the process of doing your job. It may mean that, like the buggy whip, make you're out of business, but it most likely means that you have to be the utilizer. You have to be the one that understands how to utilize this, which is why that is so important. So we need to be teaching those types of things. And also, a lot of things we've been working on and struggling with, much like what we talked about with personalization of education. We've struggled with that in education. It's going to put booster rockets on it. And so we'll see a lot of progress in a lot of human endeavors. When the internet came out, the joke was that, you could be on social media and you could pretend to be a dog. Nobody knows who you are. And anonymity actually then created some problems, I think, we're dealing with today. But with AI, anyone can pretend to be Einstein, was this quote. And I don't know about you, but I want our students to be able to be their own version of Einstein. I want them to be able to have this tool in their pocket, so to speak, so that they can, leverage the God-given talents that they have. Microsoft did a work trends report in the last month. They said every employee needs AI aptitude. And they said, an interesting quote, that the pace of work is outpacing our ability to keep up. And that's one of the things AI is going to be able to do to help us. So there's a link, but I'll tell you the quick look at what the work skills that we're going to have to teach and students are going to have in this next generation of graduates. Many of these things are things we've wanted to teach, are teaching to different degrees. We just may refocus on these more intensively than we have in the past because they've become more important than ever. So as we think about adoption, that happens on something called this curve of adoption. Now, I've got two things kind of layered on top of each other. On the bottom is the adoption rates. When things get adopted, everyone's heard of the early adopters. And then there's the adoption cycle, which is by Gartner called the hype cycle. And when you think about this, ChatGPT is probably at the peak of inflated expectation, as they say. It moves very quickly. There's this technology acceleration is happening about 3 times faster than anything we've seen in the past, typically every 18 months since the 50s. technology ability has doubled. The number of transistors in a chip or the number of capabilities that can be done doubled every 18 months. It's happening now every 6 months. So we're moving through this relatively quickly, and we should see some really useful things that we would want to adopt very soon. And here's the truth. This is the worst AI you're ever going to use. It's going to continue to get better. So let me give you two great examples. First of all, if you're familiar with Khan Academy announced about a month and a half ago something called Khanmigo, this little fellow right here, who is a virtual assistant to their students. And even when it's asked frank answers, like just give me the answer, it will walk students through, just like a good tutor would, what they need to know. And of course, the focus of this is resolving the 2 sigma problem that Bloom proposed many, many years ago. And if you think about that, it says that you needed 2 things in order to achieve great results: mentoring one-to-one and mastery learning by the mentor. So now we have AI tools already available, and Harvard study in 2014 kind of doubled down on that being true. So this one-to-one mentorship idea is what this is allowing us to provide, to your point earlier, David. And so you look at, whatever you put into this tool, this in the dark is the student asking the question, right? My code isn't working. What's wrong? Here's the code. Okay, you're almost there. Here's what you need to think about. I mean, just like when I was tutoring students, or you were, you're trying to restate the question, you're trying to go through the process of understanding with them. To your point, they're kind of leveling that playing field, and it's true in all areas, not just math or coding. Sorry about the bad image here. English language arts. Let's write a book. Tell me about the character. All right, this is the first step in writing this. And then finally, here's a question students are going through, a social studies question. And in each case, the AI tutor called Khanmigo is working with that student with mastery learning, trying to get them to the next step in the learning process. So they're not going through question 53 out of 59 when they didn't even get the first 10 right. They're kind of being coached immediately. And of course, this is a product that you buy from the Khan Academy, but this is just the beginning. Looking at productivity tools, Microsoft announced Copilot, which is an amazing tool that they're going to be putting into into Microsoft Office. So Word, Excel, PowerPoint, OneNote. It writes for you, it edits for you. It creates spreadsheets for you. All the formulas are there based on what you told it. So what's that mean? It means you have to ask really good questions, give really clear direction. And if you do that, it will do amazing things. So in this case, it's going to go ahead and combine two Office product files, and then it's going to generate a draft. Boom. Just like that. Tables, everything generated for you. Microsoft is going to release this in the next year. It will change how we teach many of our business classes, I'm sure.
So Pete, like our keynote speaker for our opening session at next year's National Conference on Education in San Diego talks a lot about how important it is for us as educators to be teaching our students how to be input engineers. And I love that phrase because I think that that's really what it's all about, right? We have to know what to input to provide the results that we really want. Is that consistent with what you're talking about?
Absolutely. And I see Joseph nodding his head as well. Prompt engineering is what it's often called in the business. I like that idea of input engineers. Knowing how to ask the question, what are the details that need to be in that question? That's critical to getting the result that you're looking for. And as people learn that, they'll be able to leverage the tool more and more. Absolutely. So just wrapping it up then, our lessons so far, we need to embrace it. Think about it as an assistant. Prompt engineering is a key skill, and we're going to have to shift curriculum. That's up to each school district in terms of what exactly that means, but be on the lookout for how that's going to need to change. We've got a number of ethical issues, and I'm going to go into some of the bigger kind of issues here in a second. But cheating obviously is one. What's it mean to go without it? That's a digital equity question. And then, there's going to be some societal change. And I guess my encouragement here is maybe with digital citizenship, we miss the opportunity to talk as well as we should have about social networks. And it's created a society. I don't take all the blame, but I take some of it. We have a society that is out of control on social. We have an opportunity to do a good job with this. And I think that's the challenge to us. So the U.S. Department of Education recently put out a report. They're going to have a webinar in 2 weeks. Encourage you to do that. Once you get this information, you can do the registration. When we talk about the existential risks of AI, just yesterday, we had all the well-known experts in AI sign a statement. This is it. Mitigating the risk of extinction from AI. Oh my gosh. Should be a global priority alongside with other societal scale risks such as pandemics and nuclear war. So they're just saying it's up there with these things. We need to put some guardrails in place. I don't know what our role is as educators, but it's something to be aware of because your community will be talking about that. There is monitoring of AI's threats to human civilization that kind of are on the level of climate change, nuclear winter, things like that. They think that's a couple of decades away. Some say as soon as 5 years, but they tend to be outliers. But there is this concern that we have, and it's real. And it's a great opportunity for conversation because maybe some of our students will be able to solve this in the future. You might have seen the recent Senate hearings, what was it, a week ago or so, where OpenAI, the company that created ChatGPT, urged regulation multiple times. I watched the whole thing and it was unmistakable. IBM was there as well as a professor, and they all said the same thing. So there's going to be a creation of an independent commission. They're thinking about a U.S. AI agency, much like we have the Federal Trade Commission, the FCC, the FTC, the FCC, and others. And because all these companies reside in the United States, we have an obligation to lead this. So I do think regulation is ahead for us. At a recent summit, there were some best case scenarios, and I think this falls along with what we've talked about here in the last few minutes. So Microsoft has a plan for how to do governance, but here's our advice as COSIN. What's your district position? You should have one. How do you support students and teachers? You should have that plan. We need to think about data privacy and security. We need to be teaching ethics and etiquette and thinking about what opportunities lie ahead. So when I think about your district policies and guidelines, think about your social media policies. What are the related administrative guidelines? You probably don't want a board policy because that's a little sticky and doesn't change too quick, right? So think about this in terms of admin guidelines. And board policy should be at a high level is what we'd say. And here's the biggest thing, model use yourself. There's a bunch of excellent products out there. This is speeding up, not slowing down. Try some of these out more than just ChatGPT, and you'll be amazed. And I think your eyes will be opened as to what the possibilities are. Thanks.